Yeah, thank you. Um, I wanted to say that July 27th is not a bad day for the Day of the Cowboy. Cowboys got to be out there if it's 110 or 10 below. So, yeah, it's all the same to them. Anyway, I want to give you a little background on Kyrgyzstan and then the reason that Josh and I went over there. The word Kyrgyzstan comes from the Turkic word Kyrgyz, which means 40. And the Persian suffix stan refers to land or land of. I think there are about 7 countries that have what I call Mustan countries, and those are Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And then the Kurdish people do not have their own country, but they're often referred to as where they live um, in that Middle Eastern area is often referred to as Kurdistan. It's I had always, ever since I was an adult, I think, wanted to go to Afghanistan because they had an active and vital herding culture, nomadic culture. And then Russia invades Afghanistan, and the Russians move out, and the U.S. invades the country, so it's not safe to go there. And I'd always also wanted to go to Mongolia, and Josh and I talked about that quite a bit. And I think it was an evening when they had, back when the Flying W was still educating people about the Flint Hills, they had a day of pasture burning and guests there. And then it was over. We're sitting around talking stuff. And my wife, Kathy, and Josh's wife, Gwen, said, "You guys are always talking about going to Mongolia. Why don't you just do it?" So Josh did some looking and found that it was a lot cheaper and easier to get to Kyrgyzstan than it was to Mongolia. Mongolia is also a very large country, and Kyrgyzstan is manageable. And we covered most of that country in the 2 weeks or so that we were there. Anyway, Josh gets on the internet, starts looking up prices and all that, and we decided we're going to go to Kyrgyzstan. We don't need anything except a passport. A lot of those countries you have to have visas and all that sort of stuff. It's a rather complicated process. Here we already had passports. All we needed to do was show up, show them the passport, and we're there. And he also begins to look for a guide and finds this, I forget the name of the guy now, but he was a guide that took us around the country. He arranged for us to cover the first half of our trip. I don't know how many miles was that, 30 miles or so. We went horseback or...
Oh, the long ride?
Yeah.
It was about 130 miles.
130, oh, if I'd have known that start, I'd never made it. Yeah, we spent a lot of time horseback, riding over the countryside, and in the last half was in a SUV that this guide only had a driver who was Russian. Kyrgyzstan, I think, was the last of those Russian countries to pull away, and really didn't. They got along with the Russians pretty well as opposed to some of the others. But anyway, our driver was Russian. Our guide was Kyrgyz, and they took us around the country in that SUV, and we went to do a lot of interesting stuff there. Got to see some horse races, Buzkashi match, and various other things. We'll get to all that. But so I was not able to go with that Afghanistan, and still would like to if that country ever straightens out, but I wouldn't feel safe there. And besides which, I think I'm probably past going to these foreign countries and doing a lot of activities. But it was a good trip, and we really learned a lot. And I'll let Josh take over from here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wearing ones. Oh, um, yes. So I obviously got very lucky in picking my parents. So having a dad who wanted to do something like this. But you mentioned it's easier to get to Kyrgyzstan is one of the reasons we went there. But also the Kyrgyz have the oldest horse culture in the world. And we've been to Argentina and other places with horse cultures to see that. And so that really intrigued me. And the Kyrgyz claim, and Greg, can you go ahead and start advancing? So the graphic on the left there is a hieroglyph. That's kind of the national symbol. And it's a hieroglyph of somebody horseback, or they certainly look horseback, and they look to be carrying a flag. The flag is an addition, but the hieroglyph of somebody horseback is 14,000 years old. Now, the Kyrgyz claim that they've been riding horses 14,000 years. Most scientists don't think that's true, I guess, but the Kyrgyz claim heritage to the 14,000 years, and it was where the horse was originally domesticated and where horse culture comes from.
That's right.
The Scythian culture that, spread horseback riding across the world was born in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan.
Yeah. And the guy, the guy in both those statues is named Manas, M-A-N-A-S, or Manas, I don't know how it's pronounced. He's sort of the man that put Kyrgyzstan together. Kyrgyzstan means the 40, and that's because he united 40 tribes or 40 families to form the country. And it was, I think he lived in the 8th or 9th century, and they wrote an epic about him. It's the world's longest epic poem, 500,000 plus lines long, and it used to be recited by people who were specialized in it, a couple of women, mostly men, and they would recite this poem. Now think of that. We got close to 500,000 plus lines to remember and recite, and they'd do it. Yeah, it was really cool.
We got to hear a recitation of part of it later in our trip.
They didn't begin,
not all of it. But
they didn't begin putting it in print until the 19th century, and I don't think they yet have the whole darn thing in there, but it is the world's longest epic poem, and it was strictly oral, the way Homer's used to be. It's 20 times longer than the Iliad and the Odyssey put together, so it's really quite a...
And Manas was epic himself. He, the national hero. That's his. They have statues of him everywhere. The Kyrgyz have a little bit of a insecurity about the Mongols because Genghis Khan is so famous. But Genghis Khan's mother was Kyrgyz, and she came from Kyrgyzstan. And the Kyrgyz were some of the first people to ally with Genghis when he united the tribes of this would be about 450 years after Manas. But Manas united the 40 tribes of Kyrgyzstan. And he famously, his horse was injured when he was crossing some mountains. And so he just picked his horse up and carried it over the mountain pass and then got it. So it was...
Is the handprint in your slide?
And then, the next
we'll
slide.
See that. I mean,
that's supposedly his actual handprint carved in rock. And you can see that's my hand. I have fairly big hands, and he was a big dude. But
yeah, he was really something. But who begins? And the epic poem, the first book is about him. Second is about his son. The third was about his grandson. But it's over 1.5 million lines long. Go
ahead. Next one, please. So we left at the Capitol, we saw some museums and stuff, and we headed out to meet with our guide. We headed out to meet our horsemen that were going to take us on this big epic ride and through the country. The Kyrgyzstan is really high. It's up in the mountains. There are these high mountain lakes. The Kyrgyz have a lot of sayings about themselves. One is, you aren't Kyrgyz if you don't ride. You aren't Kyrgyz if you don't know your 7th great-grandfather. And the only thing the world wants from Kyrgyzstan is water, because they have they have glaciers and water, and it drains into all their neighbors. And one of the reasons Kyrgyzstan is still pretty intact, they still have their intact horse culture and nomadic culture, is because even when the Soviet Union was, had taken over Kyrgyzstan, it was too poor. So Russia called Kyrgyzstan its meat locker. So it raised mutton and beef and horse and exported to Russia and exported water, and that was it. And so, a lot of other Central Asian countries got really displaced and disrupted by the Soviet Union and later other countries because they had things to extract, but Kyrgyzstan didn't. The water left on its own and is pretty easy to export sheep and cattle. So Kyrgyzstan stayed Kyrgyzstan a lot more than most countries did.
And Magnus carrying his horse over the mountain, Mongols have pony-sized horses. They're full-size in Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
So he did not carry a pony over. He carried a full-size horse.
They're called horses of the blood, or blood horses, and it's where all the seed stock for China and Mongolia and the rest of Central Asia got the very best horses came from the Kyrgyz, kind of the heartland there in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. And the blood horses are named that because they actually sweat blood when they get overheated and stuff. It's just a genetic trait that lets them just have a little more stamina, because they can sweat blood to cool down if they need to, when they're really exerting themselves. But
yeah,
they're very nice horses, very impressive horses. Next. So we traveled through the eastern half of Kyrgyzstan. The western half of Kyrgyzstan, and we got to a national park, and we met our horsemen. And the horsemen were former nomadic shepherds who had started up a business, much like Gwen and Josie and I did with our Flying W Ranch, taking tourists riding. And so we met them at the Aktarek National Park and saddled up and headed out. And
how many horses do they have?
We had 14 horses with us that we traveled with.
Yeah.
And you can go ahead and roll through a few of these slides. But this is where we started out. There were a lot of little homesteads with milk cows and donkeys and things like that. And then as we got further away, we found it got wilder and wilder. But here's a nice example of horses. The little sorrel horse is the one I rode most of the time. And this was the head horseman, Chirmash's horse, was they call sport horses, big, like thoroughbred type horses. And that was a harvest of berries there. And these are just examples of other horses. The horse on the right is the horse my dad rode most of the time. And they're tough little boogers. And the saddles, if you noticed, the saddles were just horrendous. The Kyrgyz are very poor. Those saddles, they're serpent head saddles. And I have an example on a horse outside that when we get done, I'll try to get Josie to ride him over here and everybody can look at the serpent head saddle. But it's a very fine example of a serpent head saddle made out of apricot wood and leather and handcrafted brass appointments on it. But these saddles were made out of rebar left over from the Soviet era and pallet wood from shipping pallets. And I mean, they were pretty uncomfortable, weren't they, Dad? And the Kyrgyz are built quite differently than us. Their calves are about that long and their thighs are about that long. So everything's set up for somebody built, and they're excellent riders, but I had to adjust my stirrups quite a bit just to not be in terrible pain.
Now, the old man who owned the horses, I think he had a grandson with him and a son, and then a couple of other people helping out.
We were traveling like Victorian English lords, kind of. We had a whole troop of horsemen taking care of our horses and setting up camp, and we had a cooking and an interpreter and all that. I could get used to that. So
it was easy.
It took a while for me to get used to when we got where we were going in the evening to sit down and just write in my journal and read a book and not worry about setting up camp or cooking.
We slept in a kind of a pup tent. Yeah, except one night, I forget what caused the problem, but Is that picture there?
It's coming.
Okay.
Let's talk about that once the picture comes up. So you see this scenery here. This is the mountains that we were riding into, and this is a heavily altered landscape. Of course, it's been occupied and grazed for millennia, but this is all onions. The Soviets came in. When the Soviets came in, they stopped the nomadic herding. They told all the nomads that they had to live in towns and they had certain places that they could run livestock on. And of course, that just devastated the environment. So it got overgrazed just horribly. The grass died out. Everything just really fell apart because the system was you took your animals, you grazed up into the mountains in the summer and down into the valleys in the winter, and you moved your animals all year round. And all of a sudden, the animals were locked down, the people were locked down, and it really didn't work well. So the Soviets thought the only thing wrong was that the sheep were eating everything. So they planted onions because onions were the one thing that sheep wouldn't eat. And of course, they still ate everything else, but the onions took over. So there are thousands and thousands of acres of onions growing there. And most of the sheep have adapted to eating them somewhat now. So, but it smelled strongly of onion in that area. But, and the Soviets also did things like killed all the native fish out of lakes and brought in, foreign fish and things like that were really disruptive. But, and just keep rolling, Greg. There are more onions. This ride we were on, these are some glaciers we came on. So on this ride, we were never under 10,000 feet, and we crossed a couple mountain passes that were over 14,000 feet.
I mean, Colorado brags about its 12,000-foot mountains.
Yeah. And
we were the two fosses that were 14,000.
Yeah, right there, our guide and interpreter there is waving. That's a little over 14,000 feet that he's sitting at azimuth. He was our guide. He'd been an interpreter at army bases in Afghanistan for years, so he spoke perfect English and was a wonderful resource on education. He was his seventh great grandfather had been the last king of Kyrgyzstan before the Russians deposed him and took over the country. So,
how old was that old guy that owned all the horses?
So that was one of the interesting things about our trip. Was everywhere we went, my dad was the oldest person there by far.
Yeah, and that was in the later 70s at the time.
And the senior horseman, Churmash, was in his 50s, which I'm 54 now, right, Gwen? I think. And he was in his late 50s at the time, and he was just crushed to find out that my dad was 78. Yeah. He was used to being the senior person in the room. But the Kyrgyz used to be very long-lived people, but they, when China pretty much took over after the Soviet Union, they pretty much own all the livestock. And so the Kyrgyz diet changed from almost exclusively dairy and meat to being almost all processed cookies and candy and stuff. And they've gone from living into their 90s regularly to living into their 60s and having diabetes and all the other problems of civilization. But, and so that's an ibex skull there. That's the rigging on a saddle. The ibex are the national animal. They, when we look at my saddle out there, I have a quirt made out of ibex horn.
It's a mountain sheep, right?
Yes, it's a mountain sheep, not a goat. And we found a lot of skulls because in the winter they die in avalanches a lot. They, of course, are really nimble and they live up high in the mountains. But
we never saw a live ibex.
Never saw a live ibex.
Or do they have wolves?
They have wolves.
We didn't see any wild animals.
No, we saw very, very little wildlife. It's a pretty devastated environment. Post-Soviet Kyrgyzstan, a lot of it was wooded and forested. They clear cut all the forests, and it's a heavily altered landscape. But they're adapting, and now that they've once the Soviets gave up on stopping the migrations, the grass is coming back. They're moving their animals up and down the mountains again and in the valleys like they used to, and the grass is really coming back, and their economy's pretty strong as far as livestock goes. Keep rolling. So here's an example of yurt on the right. As we rode through this ride through this giant kind of the center of Kyrgyzstan. We saw, at the time, we figured up we had to have seen we kind of tried to keep count because we're ranchers, so we tried to keep count of how many cattle we saw and horses we saw and sheep and goats we saw. We gave up because we saw well over 1 million sheep and goats, well over 500,000 cattle, and well over probably that many horses at least.
Yeah.
And no, I was more than that. It was just lots and lots of livestock, all of them taken care of by nomadic families. This is an example. You see, those are all sheep and goats there that you see behind the yurt. And at night, they bring the sheep and goats in to a very tight pen. And that's partly, it concentrates their manure, which they then harvest and sell as cooking fuel for people in towns. But it also protects them because they have snow leopards, they have wolves, they have golden jackals, and they have wild eagles that
would kill the sheep. Yeah.
And so these families, the little kids on donkeys would take the sheep and goats up the mountains every day. Before daylight, they'd take them out. The adults would take the cattle out and send them more on the lower slopes of the mountains, and the horses, they would stake the mares out and turn all the colts and studs and unbred mares loose to graze wherever they wanted, pretty much. And then they milk the mares, and that's one of the main foods of the nomads is mare's milk and curdled mare's milk, which is a slightly alcoholic fermented milk like a yogurt, and then cheese that they make from it.
Yeah.
But they seldom butcher animals. They did several times for us because it was, an occasion, but most of them don't own many of the animals, so they don't eat much meat anymore because they just don't own it. And the Kyrgyz have a very strong honor system, honor culture, where they have stories about families starving to death looking after animals that belong to somebody else, but their honor wouldn't allow them to, butcher the animals they were looking after because for food or sustenance.
Yeah.
So, but those may be apocryphal, but they have the stories.
We saw thousands and thousands and thousands of cattle, sheep and goats, horses, and in that whole distance we rode, never saw a fence.
Yeah.
They did little pens near the yurt where they'd pin them up.
Like that there, yeah. Little holding pens at night, but no fences, no 2-track roads. We didn't see a vehicle. We didn't see a man-made light.
We did toward the end. There was a yurt that had a
cattle
car
in a vehicle and a man-made light, and it was shocking after 5 days of not seeing anything like that. The other thing we didn't see, there were no buildings. It was all yurts. The other thing we didn't see during that time were jet trails in the sky because it's a no-fly zone because of Afghanistan. And so there's no airplanes in the sky at night or during the day either. And that was shockingly different than we were used to. It was wonderful to see.
How many of those can you see a day here? Dozens, yeah. But
there's another example of night pens and the sheep on the hills. And as we got deeper into the mountains, we saw more and more native vegetation. It was somewhat jarring because the Soviets had introduced a lot of North American vegetation, and they considered things like big blue stem and lead plant and some of the plants that we really value here as invasive species there and undesirable. But like Serratia lespedeza, which is just absolute hell on earth here in the Flint Hills, is one of the most desired species they have there because it stays palatable. It doesn't get woody like it does here, and everything there gobbles it up. They have trouble keeping Serratia growing there, and they try to get rid of big blue stem.
We need to import a few Kyrgyz.
Yeah. But it got prettier and prettier, and the deeper into the mountains we got, the less impact the Soviets had. There's good examples. There's the saddle that I rode most of the time. It was uncomfortable, and it was Soviet era, so it was probably from the 1970s, made out of rebar and pallets, and they worked. I mean, by the time I got done, I'd made my own straps and adjusted my stirrups and made them fit a lot better. So, and here's an example of the horses, just gorgeous, high quality horses, beautiful horses. Most of these horses that were running wild were getting milked, and then the offspring were getting sold. And the Kyrgyz owned a lot of their own horses, and so we ate a lot of horse meat, a lot of donkey meat, delicious, but they didn't eat much mutton or beef. And here's I think this is the yurt that when we on our journey one day was really windy, and we'd been
Is that why they didn't put the tent up?
yeah, they'd been trying to put the tent up for about an hour, and some nomads about 5 miles away had been watching with great mirth, and came over and offered to let us stay in the yurt with them. So we got to stay in the yurt, and
really
that
high
was
point
amazing.
to stay in a real yurt with real
Yeah,
Kyrgyz people, and not
and the yurts are set up. The half of it is for the man, and half of it's for the woman.
You walk in the door, to the right is the woman's part.
The man's part has the hearth for heating, and they all have cupboards, big quilt cupboards that they keep all their linens and stuff in. And then the woman's part has the kitchen and the beds, and then everybody sits in the middle in a circle, kind of. It is very great, wonderful hospitality, and
yeah, that was one of the high points, getting to stay in one of the real
yes, and meeting and interacting with real nomads that are still
herders,
herding animals for hundreds of miles through wild country. It was amazing. And that's just a lot of typical scenery. And those dogs, those are hunting dogs. They use them to try to keep the jackals and wolves and snow leopards at bay. Very well behaved dogs, very big and hardy. They need to be. And just keep rolling, Greg. We took a lot more pictures than this even. You can see it's very scenic. We kept saying we should have had Mark Feiden come with us just so he could photograph the whole thing. But yeah. This is Azamat, our interpreter, talking to our hosts at the yurts. That was the mare's milk that we were drinking there. Surprisingly good. That is the junior horseman, the grandson of Churmash. Churmash is on the right, his son Abek on the left, and Janabek is the one sleeping on that horse there. That had our tents and stuff, and he would sleep on that horse. Lawler, he enjoyed himself quite a bit. So just keep rolling. That peak back there in that last slide is oh, no worries. Yeah, the big peak there is called Khan Tingray, and it's the highest peak in Kyrgyzstan. It used to be Mount Lenin, but they changed it to Khan Tingray, which is the Kyrgyz word for God, for the mountain of God, or King God, yeah. That's about the extent. I did see dung beetles. Dung beetles are my favorite animal in the world, and I did get to see dung beetles in Kyrgyzstan. I'm really glad for that. And that was about the only wildlife we saw. We saw some marmots and a kangaroo rat. That's our cook cooking in the yurt that night. And that was the one vehicle we saw back there. That the whole time. That was the first time we'd seen a vehicle in 5 days.
Yeah, very time.
Yeah.
The only one we saw. Only one we saw in that whole time.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, except in the city.
Until we came to this, and we rode through there. At the end of our big ride, we came to a superhighway, and this is just 2 lanes of it. There's another 2 lanes, but the Chinese are building the road and belt system, and this is the portion that's going through Kyrgyzstan, and it's pretty much empty. There's almost no traffic because it's not connected to anything yet, but they're building segments at a time, and they're building the easier segments first and then going through the mountain passes. But they're getting ready. They're connecting Beijing to Istanbul is the goal.
I think part of those roads were on the old Silk Road.
Yes, so the belt system that the Chinese are building is basically just the old Silk Road, and at this point we were on the Silk Road for most of the rest of our journey. And
not in the mountains, but once we got out into the countryside.
Yeah. And from here, go ahead and roll, Greg. And there's some people we met on the way. And so we got to the caravanserai, which is was an old fortified trading post on the Silk Road. And this is where we got off our horses, unfortunately, and got in minivans, four-wheel drive Russian minivans, and went to the caravanserai. It was built long before Genghis, but Genghis fortified them all and made them much more safe, and held until the Ottoman Empire fell. Most of those caravanserais were intact and functional until about then. But here's yak and sheep, and this we drove through a large part of the country. You can see just gorgeous, pretty rough roads. That was pretty typical right there. A lot of winding and stuff because it's rough country.
Was that headed up to a lake or something?
Yeah, that's where we rode around a lake.
And man, that was a winding road.
This on a shorter ride there. Just keep rolling on through this, Greg. And we came to the ancient Silk Road town of Nairn, which is a really old city. Not much left of the city except for Soviet bloc style housing and stuff, but they have a huge animal market there. And so you keep rolling through these. You can see the horses and cattle and sheep. You see the sheep with the huge fat deposits on their tail. They really like mutton fat. They even rub mutton fat on almost everything that you really don't want them to rub mutton fat on, then hand it to you to eat as a special treat. But
my one's really an experience seeing that market day.
Yeah,
because most of them had like trailers that would be hooked onto a semi or something that were filled with all kinds of
livestock and
and
produce and it was a true
it was like a general store or something.
Yeah, it was a real bazaar.
Yeah,
but
one other thing, somebody had 8 or 10 horses for sale, and there's a kind of elevator road to the south end of this market, and he kept running them back and forth there, getting people's attention.
Advertising,
yeah.
It was a lot like a horse sale here. And so our next stop, we got to visit with a eagle hunter, and he was a professional eagle hunter. His family had been eagle hunters for at least 7 generations. And it was fast. They use eagles. They catch eagles or hatch eagles and use them to defend their sheep. The eagle hunters will hire out to go hunt golden jackals or juvenile wolves in areas to keep them from bothering sheep. They have 2 ways of getting eagles. They climb the mountains and get a fledgling eagle out of the nest and take it home and raise it, or they climb the mountains and they get an egg out of the nest and hatch it and raise it. If they egg eagles only get to be about 12 pounds, and they never get really big, and they are not very good hunters. But fledgling eagles will get to be over 20 pounds, sometimes 18 to 22, I think they said, and are very good hunters, but they only will stay with the person for a few years, and then they'll release them and they'll become wild eagles.
And this guy had 2 eagles.
Yeah.
They use female golden eagles for hunting.
Yeah.
And we each got to hold on our wrist an eagle, I'll tell you, 15, 16 pounds. I don't know how long that lasts.
That's a big bird. Yeah. But and he hunted rabbits just to demonstrate for us because it wasn't the season for anything else.
Brought a rabbit with him.
Yeah, he brought a rabbit and released it.
Turned it loose, and the eagle swooped down.
And he also had hunting dogs, Korzoi hunting dogs.
Yeah.
And
that was a real interesting highlight, having seen those eagles and holding an eagle on your wrist. Yeah.
And imagining them catching a juvenile wolf or a golden jackal is impressive. But our next, we got really lucky, and the next place we went to Karakol, which is another ancient city on the Silk Road, and it's on the Chinese border. And so it's right across from the part of China where the Uyghurs are, which the Uyghurs are a Muslim population in China that are getting
the Chinese are really
the Chinese have concentration camps for them, re-education camps for them. So the Uyghurs in Kyrgyzstan are seem very Chinese to the Kyrgyz, but are considered absolute foreigners in China, where most of their homeland is. But we have a very intact Uyghur culture in Kyrgyzstan still.
And one night our guys had set up a dinner that night with an Uyghur woman.
Yeah, in the home of a Uyghur family, and had traditional Uyghur cooking and all. It was amazing, very fun. But in Karakol, we then were going to go stay at a agritourism, basically a guest ranch, we called it the Kyrgyz Flying W because of our guest ranch here. And when we got there, beautiful place and lots of that's a picture on the left. And excuse me, it's on the edge of the Pamir Gorge. So that's the Pamir Gorge. And this is a big tableland, and the Pamir Gorge is the eroded area that runs all the way from the Pamir Mountains are on either side, and it runs into China. Really fertile, really beautiful place. And that on the right is a picture of Oscar, and he is a warlord. We didn't know that at the time, but he owns the agritourism place. And when we got there, it was beautiful. We were really enjoying it. But he came and met us and talked to us a bit through our interpreter.
Very hospitable,
and insisted on taking us on a tour of his holdings. And so we spent 2 days touring his holdings and everything. I mean, it was really impressive. He imports farm machinery from Germany to do the farming. He raises mainly barley. But also he imports Angus cattle from Montana, horses from Texas and Kentucky, and had just, amazing livestock and sheep. They don't have to import sheep because they, as he said, they have the best sheep in the world. And they did. They had gorgeous sheep with lots of big fat deposits. So but being a warlord is a good deal. When we got there, we had Wi-Fi for the first time on the trip, and we were just kind of curious about him. I looked him up, and it immediately his name came up as minor warlord of the Pamir Gorge, and he's on restriction. He can't travel in Europe or the U.S. and stuff, but you never know it. He was the former Secretary of Agriculture. He's in the middle, so yeah. But he was the former Secretary of Agriculture and Commerce for the former government of Kyrgyzstan that had been deposed, and as his parting gift, he gifted himself the Pamir Gorge, basically. So it's good to be king.
I think they had the first free election when we were there, just after we left.
They had the first free elections.
We credit ourselves with bringing democracy,
freedom and democracy to Kyrgyzstan. And here, so while there, we had a wonderful time and wonderful food, all that. But they invited us to go to the hippodrome, and his son Abek was competing in the races in kukbaroo, which is the national game, and I'll explain that in a bit. And so while there, we got to play with eagles again. They have an eagle tournament there during the horse games, the national horse games, where all the eagle hunters from around the country come, and they have competitions of hunting rabbits and stuff. But they also, for the finale of the Eagle Festival, they all release their older fledgling birds at once, and whoever's birds come back win prizes. But most of the birds, that's when they typically release them, and they go back, they disperse and go back into the wild and hunt on their own. And some of them will come back to their hunters years later, but usually they don't. But that's Reina Kinch, the Oscar's Kyrgyz Flying W. And this is where we heard some traditional musicians that also recited the Manus poem, parts of the Manus poem to it. Yeah, just
not all 500,000 acre lines, a few lines.
And that's one of their sport horses. That's a crossbreed between Kyrgyz blood and Kentucky thoroughbreds. And that's Oscar on the left, and that's Abek on the right. That's another national sport, is wrestling on horseback, grappling on horseback. It takes a lot of skill. And then they have a bride race, which is a Kyrgyz tradition, where a bride if she has more than one suitor, can claim the right to race them, and if she beats them, she can court or whip the suitors she doesn't like away, and then pick her suitor that she wants to marry. So it's not actually it's more of a play at this point, but still. And then on back one more slide. I'm sorry, Greg. On the right is buckaroo. That's the national game, and you may know it as buzkashi. That's what they call it in Afghanistan. I think it was in one of the.
It's all over that area. All those stands and Kyrgyzstan plays this. It's their national or international sport.
But the Kyrgyz say it started in Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
It's played now with a headless, legless goat. They have a goat
or calf,
but usually a goat. And their shaman ritually slices its throat, guts it, sews it shut, and cuts its legs and head off. And then you have to, on horseback, reach down and pick up this 40, 50-pound goat. And your team is anywhere from 4 to 500 people, and the opposing team the same, and you try to carry it into the goal of the opposing team. And it's very violent, very dangerous. They have ambulances and the military there to keep people from actually fighting.
Yeah.
But
the one we saw, it was teams of what were there, about 8 or 10?
About 8 or 10, yeah.
And they had to
from different regions.
Yeah, carry this body.
Yeah.
Of this guy. We'd seen north. We were watching horse races, and I noticed on the north end of this area to the east was a goat tied up. Next time we saw the goat, he was out ahead with the guts. And they were carrying him. I forget. Do they just throw him out there and the two teams have to fight?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But these were teams with only 8 or 10 people on the side.
Yeah.
And the real ones that they started, they started years ago, there would be hundreds of people on each side.
Basically mock warfare.
Yeah. And it was one gutted animal, calf or a goat, and hundreds of people fighting for it. I mean, it was brutal.
But the original kukbaru was started by shepherds. And if they saw a juvenile wolf in their sheep, the young kids would run and grab it by the scruff of the neck and carry it to their neighbor's yurt and throw it through the door, just as a prank. And then that would escalate, and they'd go back and forth. So that's how it all started. And it's still fun, but dangerous.
Yeah. It was really, I'd read about that for years. I was really delighted to get to see
that we actually got to watch it. And the military did break it up while we were there watching. So, and those are just examples of Oscar's cattle and horses and sheep. So, and that's it. That was our trip to Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
But we learned a lot.
Thank you.
And I guess it's okay if we do questions. Anybody? The question was, since the Kyrgyz don't own the sheep and the cattle and stuff, who owns them? Some is Chinese or is Russian owned, but most are Chinese owned interests. The Chinese investors own big herds of animals and then farm them out to the different shepherds that take care of them. And the question was what our route was to get there. We went through Istanbul. That was the easiest way. You can go through Moscow, but it was easier you have to have permits and stuff for that. Istanbul, we could just with a passport.
Did you have to spend time in airport Istanbul?
Nope. Yeah, my dad said the Istanbul airport is a very pleasant place to be. So,
do they practice Islam?
So that is another Kyrgyz saying, that they are just Islamic enough that their neighbors leave them alone. There are mosques everywhere that are but nobody in them. They are animists. They their traditional religion. So
Do they sell their livestock back then goes back to China or Russia?
most of it's exported to China or Russia. Yeah, and in the cities, they consume beef there and stuff. But oh gosh,
6 million.
yeah, about 6 million, and it's this.
The largest town.
Yeah, and most of that's concentrated in 3 cities. So, but 6 million people in something the size of Nebraska.
Aside from meat, what was the rest of the food like? Like, what kind of spices do they use? And stuff?
Good question. Yeah. The food was wonderful. I mean, I unfortunately got sick on the plane ride over, and I got food poisoning the first night we were there from the hotel food. And so the first couple days on our journey, I was basically rolling around on the ground in piles of donkey poop and moaning. So it was pretty miserable, but I got over that pretty quick. And the food we had, our cook was a Russian cook, and they had actually butchered a lamb for us instead of a ewe, which was nice to have mutton or lamb instead of mutton. But we ate a lot of mutton as well. But a lot of horse and donkey sausage. A lot of that gets made into sausage. That was delicious. We had stew made out of horse a couple times. Lots of dill, lots of cucumbers, and the best watermelon and cantaloupe. Watermelon and cantaloupe are from that area, and the watermelon and cantaloupe. I've never tasted as good a watermelon and cantaloupe. It was delicious, and plums and apples, all kinds of stuff.
What did the horse milk cheese taste like?
It tasted like yogurt that had kind of gone off with a little bit of vodka in it. So that was one other part of the trip. Everywhere we went, partly because of my dad's seniority, people would offer us vodka. And my dad refused most of it, so I had to drink it for guest rights. And it was the most vodka I've drunk in my entire life, and I did not enjoy it. So it was like turpentine. And Dad didn't eat the cheese or the mare's milk either, but you did try the kummas, the fermented mare's milk. Yep. The urban populations have very good literacy, good education. The rural populations less so. But there's their big concern of the rural people, like the nomadic herders, is they have a lot of German tourists, and when they're done on their tour, they leave the dirt bikes there for the kids, and so a lot of the kids leave and go to the city with dirt bikes instead of staying and enjoying the nomadic lifestyle. So their population is dwindling and becoming more urban. So that's but they have a strong culture, so they're surviving.
How were you seen exert?
The question was, how are we received as Americans? Very friendly. I mean, you could have walked through anywhere in the country of Kyrgyzstan with $100 bills hanging out your back pocket, and you wouldn't have been robbed. I mean, it was very safe, very friendly, very positive towards Americans. The warlord especially, because he deals, he buys things from America. But like our interpreter had been an interpreter for the army in Afghanistan. A lot of people had been contract workers in Afghanistan, so they had very positive, it raised their standard of living, having some income and stuff. So. And there's a U.S. military base, one of the only ones in the area in Kyrgyzstan. So that's their, oh boy, conversion rate for money.
Ooh. We didn't have to spend any on no horses.
Yeah, there was no place to spend cash. No, they didn't do that. But I think it was obols, right? I think it's obols, and I think it was like 24 obols to $1 at the time. But things were relatively inexpensive for us. The dollar was strong. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah. That's the culture. Criticize. That's what they were teaching. How would they handle it?
I think my dad said, yeah, they would just kind of wiggle it.
Now that pot can
Yeah.
around.
They didn't do it very well.